welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast. Helen, welcome to the Mind Chimp podcast. How are we doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me, Danny. Yeah, I'm just enjoying the groovy music that I've not heard for quite a long time. So yeah,
I know,
good
right?
to be here.
I was listening to it just before we kind of got into season 3, and I was like, does this music still work? I was like, no, it works.
Definitely works.
I still like it. This has been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming. And I was thinking while I was prepping for kind of this interview, I was like, oh, how did me and you meet? And when did this whole thing happen? And to now, right? Like, how we come to this moment where we're doing a podcast? And I think I got thinking, we probably got talking maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And if I remember right, the key conversation, our first conversation was on a Teams. And I think we talked about backstage, front stage design and learning and kind of experience design. And then I think I got into a conversation around synthetic media and why people shouldn't be getting into instructional design now, because in 3 years' time, AI will be here. And then 3 years on, here we are. So that's an interesting point of reflection. But I guess, yeah, Helen, as we start this show, I like to ask 2 questions before we get into it. My first question is, what is your log line?
My log line is, I guess, building connections and positively challenging.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, good. I like it. So tell me a little bit around what you mean by that.
Well, I think what I do, I guess every day in my job is try and build and maintain connection with people. And I think that's becoming even more important. You obviously just mentioned AI, but as I guess our worlds change with the influx of new technology, I think building connections and human connection is just becoming more important than ever. It's always been something that I think it's been important to me anyway, in whatever role I've had, is just talking to people, gaining knowledge from other people, building those connections, building relationships. So I guess that's that side of it. And then the other side of it is positively challenging, because I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the industry that either needs to be called out or spoken about or positively challenged. And I guess that's what I like to do on I would say daily basis. Maybe that's a bit too often, but quite often.
Nice. I like that. Positively challenged is good. And then I think I'm going to need the insight a little bit later on. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to pick a number now. Okay. And the number what you pick will dictate a question what I'm going to ask you later on in the show. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So pick your number between 1 and 12.
Oh, 7.
Oh, my last guest said 8. Okay, so this is a question that I want you to think about, and I'll ask you about it a little bit later on.
Okay.
So the question what you've picked is, what is the most difficult thing you have ever had to apologize for?
Okay, there's probably quite a long list there that I need to start thinking about which one's the worst difficult thing.
Now you see why I wait till later on in the session. Okay, cool. So I guess obviously, Helen, we've known each other maybe 3 to 4 years, but there might be people on this show who have never heard of you, never come across you, and they're wondering, who is this person? So maybe, yeah, give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of your kind of your career, your LinkedIn, if you like.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that 3 or 4 years ago when we met, Danny. I think at the time I was probably a senior learning designer, kind of questioning, I guess, what I was doing with my life, designing kind of e-learning solutions for companies that had a very specific idea of what they wanted, and I was really stuck in this idea that there was just a world outside of e-learning that existed, and how could I kind of bring some different ways of thinking into what I was doing. And obviously saw all the good stuff that you were doing and thought, let's have a chat about that. And since then, so my background is learning design. I think that's where, as you mentioned, instructional design, that's where I've kind of, that was my bread and butter for a while. But worked for a company called Brightwave, who were then Capita as senior learning designer, and then briefly went on to work for Learning Pool before Thrive approached me to come and work for them as head of learning. I'd not, even though Brightwave had a learning platform, it wasn't really part of my role there. And I was really excited, I guess, from a Thrive perspective to come into like learning and skills side of platform stuff rather than just content and creating e-learning. And it's been quite eye-opening, I think, to look at both the content side of stuff, but that other kind of experience of how do we create those learning experiences for people from a platform perspective. So yeah, worked for Thrive as head of learning and then was promoted into the role I'm currently in, which is chief learning officer. I think I guess within the L&D industry, a CLO usually means you're an internally focused role that oversees the learning and development opportunities for a whole organization. And whilst I guess I do have oversight of that, my role is really focused on, I guess building connection, building relationships, to go back to what I spoke about earlier, and positively challenging in the industry as well. I guess just being the voice of what good learning looks like for us as a business and having that voice within the wider industry as well. So that's me in a nutshell from a role perspective. But then outside of that, I also have created Women in Community, which brings together women from across L&D and HR, and further afield, higher education as well. And I'm also host of my own podcast. So I host Diary of a CLO, where I get to talk to some amazing people, including yourself at some point.
Nice. Cheers on. I mean, thanks for the nice kudos there. I'll take that. So there's a load of stuff I want to kind of needle into on there. But I want to kind of first go back a bit more personal to you. So, you found yourself as a chief learning officer right now. And there's a good kind of career like path there where you just talked about. But what kind of made you want to get into learning, I guess, like in the first place? Like go right back to, in fact, let me ask you this question. When you was younger, and your parents or your teacher would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up, Helen?" What would you say?
Well, I think when I was probably about 9 or 10, I wanted to be a hotel manager. Very specifically, wanted to manage hotels. First of all, I wanted to be the just responsible for looking after people, making sure they had a good time, had a good experience. Run everything that was. I just had this idea that a hotel was a really cool place to be. I mean, we didn't go to hotels very often. I just saw these amazing hotels in the town I used to live in. It was Harrogate, which is obviously quite posh. And used to think, wow, it'd be amazing to manage one of those. I mean, looking back now, like what the hell was I thinking? Like, why would you ever, like, no disregard for like the job. It would just be such a difficult job to manage a hotel. Not my skill set at all. So that would be the first one. And then I think when I was a little bit older, probably about, I don't know, 17 or 18, I used to work in a cheese shop part-time. And I think I could have carried on doing that as a job, as a full-time job. I often look back and think, why did I leave that job? It's like being a cheese selling assistant, getting to taste cheese all day. That would have been an amazing career. So yeah, those two things: hotel manager and cheese seller. There you go.
I mean, I think you might be the first who's ever said I was a cheese seller. How did that even happen?
I got a part-time job in a cheese shop in my local town. Saturday girl behind the counter. Didn't realize how popular cheese was. Had no idea about all these people that would have dinner parties and have cheese boards after them. And the shop sold 250 different types of cheese, so I had to know everything that we sold, as well as kind of like other deli stuff as well, and all the stuff like the wine and stuff that would go with it. And I was just really good at having conversations with people and finding out what they were looking for and recommending stuff to them as well. And then I ended up working for them. I went to college. I went to art college and realized it really wasn't really for me. So I dropped out and waited a year to go back to uni. And in the meantime, I worked full time at the cheese shop, and just met loads of cool people, loads of customers. But also I remember really specifically this guy came in the shop and he was asking me for a recommendation of a cheese. And I was like talking to him about this particular cheese and saying how amazing it was, like going into all like the flavors and the background of the dairy that sold it. And I was like, it's just such a great cheese, blah, blah, blah. And then it turned out this guy was actually the owner of that dairy, and he'd come into the shop to see what we were doing and how we were selling his cheese. And he was like, "Do you want to come? Do you want to come and work for me? The way that you've just pitched my cheese is amazing." And I was like, "Oh, like starstruck 16-year-old, like you're the owner of a dairy." Or how old I was, 18. And I just thought it was I just happened to be really good at, I guess, that customer service side of stuff looking back. But yeah, it was a great job, but was something that I would never at the time have thought I can make a career out of this. I could have, like, looking back, opened my own deli, opened a cheese shop, something I could still do. It's in the back of my mind somewhere.
I mean, there's a very clear follow-up question on there, which is like, what cheese would you recommend? Like, what was your go-to? What was the cheese? I mean, obviously it was when you was 18, but like, yeah, what's the cheese of choice? If you had to offer me a cheese right now, what would it be, Helen?
Well, I go for my, like, traditional choice would always be a cheddar. I just don't think you can beat a cheddar. I love mull cheddar is the best cheddar out there. We can have an argument about it later with anyone who wants to. But then if you want something fancier, I'd go for a cheese called a mimolette, it came in as a round ball. It's from France, and it is rock hard, and you have to cut it with a massive cleaver about this big and rock it side to side to cut it in half and then slice it up. And it's really, really hard, but really nutty and really unusual. So
Wow.
those are the two ends. Cheddar being very traditional, mimolette being something you probably never had before.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Go.
times when I've gone for like, yeah, when I've got this selection of cheeses, when I've gone out somewhere and I'm eating some cheese, I'm like, I honestly can't taste anything here. Like, this could literally just be something, and maybe it's not it's just an unsophisticated palate, maybe.
Yeah, you're just a heathen, Danny. That's all.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. It's been said before, and I'm sure it'll get said again. So you went from wanting to be a hotel manager, and right away through to kind of this cheese connoisseur, let's say, to being in learning. How? I mean, and then somewhere in between there, you've got that whole kind of thing around art college. So yeah, walk me through that.
Yeah, so I started art college at York St John, doing kind of art and design, very practical production of art. But as part of that, there were art history seminars. And I'd almost gone to uni specifically to do art history. And every time I had one of these seminars, which I think was like once a week, I thought, this is actually what I want to be doing. I don't want to be doing the practical side of stuff as much as I enjoyed it. It didn't kind of light that spark for me. So I went back to uni to do art history at the University of Nottingham. And that was like really where I just had this idea in my head that I was gonna end up doing a PhD. I was going to become a lecturer, and I was going to lecture in art history. And that was what I had my mind set on, from probably not straight away, but towards the end of my bachelor's, definitely. And then I did a master's, started a PhD, and was very much kind of on track to do that. And then I realized, like, halfway through my PhD, I don't want to be a lecturer. It's not actually like, it's just not what I envisioned. It's quite interesting because I think I found it really difficult to come to terms with how subjective art history was. So I'd be researching something quite particular, obviously for a PhD. It was on 1960s conceptual photography, and I'd argue kind of that we should be looking at this idea around these photographs, and then someone would come in and say, well, I don't agree with that, and here's why. And we'd end up having a quite heated conversations around it. And I just realized that actually everything is just so subjective that it doesn't actually mean a lot. And it's really hard to kind of, I guess, verbalize what I really mean by that, because it's good to have debate, it's good to have different opinions, but it kind of made the whole process of being an art history PhD or a lecturer pointless to me, because whatever you said, someone could argue against in the opposite direction anyway. So it really lost a bit of value for me in that respect. And so, yeah, I dropped out of that and ended up just qualifying with an MPhil at the end. I did a, I don't know, 60, 70,000 word thesis and still got a qualification at the end of it. But yeah, I just realized lecturing wasn't for me. And then I was at that point where I thought, I don't really know what I want to do with my career. Hadn't really necessarily, at that point, I'd been thinking I was headed in a certain direction and then just didn't have anything to go towards. But I really needed a job as well. So a company in Nottingham called BYG Systems, who I think still exists. They do bespoke e-learning solutions for customers. They were advertising for a script writer, I think the role was at the time. And I thought, well, I'm good at writing, good at researching. They wanted a huge list of qualifications for a graduate role, but I needed a job. So I thought, okay, went to interview, and I always tell this story about the interview because it just sticks in my memory so vividly. I had a 3-hour written exam for the role, which was just ridiculous. Like they asked me to write a whole script for an animation. Looking back, I didn't really know what I was doing because didn't know what a scriptwriter was, didn't really know what e-learning was, didn't know who the company were. I was just like, just winging it essentially. Wrote down this 3-hour test, and that was fine. So they called me back for an interview, which was the next stage after that would have been a face-to-face with the managing director. And halfway through the second interview, they said, oh, the MD's actually in his office, come and meet him now, and kind of threw me in the door with the MD, totally unprepared. Wow. And the MD, as I was sitting opposite him, he was looking at my paper CV because it was a paper one, he'd printed it out. And he was like, okay, really looking over it in what looked like a lot of detail. And then he was like, tell me, what do you think a good leader looks like? So I was like, well, someone that you can look up to, that you respect, that you can build trust with, blah, 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 listing off all these things. And then he said, no, you're missing something. And so I started listing off more things that a leader could possibly be in my eyes. And he just kept going, no, and getting really kind of annoyed and irate that I wasn't listing what he was expecting me to. And then he said, a good leader needs to be prepared to be hated. And that's the answer he'd been looking for. And that should have told me a lot about his character and the relationship we'd probably have from that moment on. But I was like, okay, right. I'm not sure. I didn't say this, but I was like, I'm not sure I agree with you, but okay. Anyway, they offered me the job. And so I ended up in the e-learning space, having never known anything about it before. And yeah, I guess the rest is history there from moving from that kind of e-learning back. Quickly realized that a lot of the skills I had, so obviously spent a long time researching, writing, academic research, but other types of writing as well. I'd been involved in a lot of digital projects at uni. I'd actually managed the learning. Because I did teaching as part of my PhD, I'd actually managed modules via Moodle. So I had been involved in that kind of LMS side of stuff without necessarily knowing, which tells you a lot about how those kind of systems are run in a university as well. So I quickly realized, actually, I've got more experience here than you're kind of letting me play with. You're saying that I'm only just worthy of being a scriptwriter in your organization, but actually that's, ignoring a lot of the stuff that, I'm capable of. So I was there for 5 months, learned a lot about the industry, about what was good about it, what wasn't as great. But it definitely wasn't the space I wanted to stay in. So moved on, to a global corporate organization called Thomson Reuters, who you probably will have heard of.
It's fascinating when I speak to people from learning development and people who are still in learning development. No one really has a career path to getting into learning development. There's certain people who will have this natural career path, they'll know what they want to do, but I reckon if you reverse engineer, someone somewhere has formed that opinion, probably someone from L&D, one way or another, or HR. But often you just fall into it by accident. When I think about the people who I know very closely, when I've spoken to them about their kind of way in, it's always by accident. Mm-hmm. But there tends to be a unique set of skills, I guess, a bit like Taken, right? The people who are really good in L&D or who find themselves into L&D tend to have this collection of skills. And I think you've talked about some of them already. You've talked about kind of having that thing of having a point of view. It's a bit around being able to have healthy debate, but actually on customer service skills and then empathy and stuff. And I want to kind of get into that a little bit later on. But so you went from there all the way through to where you are right now, which is Thrive. In that whole period, of them times and them little touch points throughout that journey, what's been your biggest aha moment?
I guess from an industry perspective more broadly, is how interconnected a lot of people. So I guess I'm gonna answer this from a couple of different perspectives. So there was at one point when I realized that a lot of people knew each other and were interconnected, and ideas were kind of shared in a big bubble that I'm now part of and now contribute to. But I think that was a big kind of, oh, there's a whole kind of industry around this that I just had absolutely no idea of. It's like learning technologies, for example. Never heard of that before, and then suddenly it's like something that is highlighted in the calendar every year. The other one is that a lot of teams that I was working with, so obviously I've always worked vendor side. So even when I was working with Thomson Reuters, we were selling compliance solutions to external customers. And I would say that a lot of the teams that we worked with didn't really have a good understanding of what they were looking for or what they were trying to do as a result of the training, which has constantly been kind of a big gripe of mine with whatever I've been doing, is that there was no opportunity to, I guess, dig deeper into the why and what are you actually trying to do. We were often approached by people saying, this is what we want you to do for us. And there was no time to ask why at that stage, because they'd already signed a contract. There was already a project manager assigned and that kind of stuff. So I think the aha moment there was that there's actually a lot of questions unanswered that, and that was across the organizations I've worked for. So BYG at the beginning, but then Thomson Reuters, then Brightwave, and then very briefly at Learning Pool. We were constantly faced with teams who just didn't want to spend the time getting underneath the why of what they were asking for, but also a lot of people thought that they had done that and that they were doing the right thing for their people and the businesses, and so it was very hard to convince them otherwise when there was opportunity to do that. A lot of the time, I think one of the biggest pain points for me was just having to create and to produce something without there being a lot of time and consideration for the why and what do we want to get out of this. So I guess that's not really a positive aha moment, but it was a bit eye-opening from my career perspective, in that there was that opportunity there to start pushing back and encouraging that pushback at the pre-sales stage of conversations. So a lot of the time I'd try and get into those conversations to start digging into what are you actually trying to do here, and is e-learning really going to be the answer for you, which was really difficult because I was working for e-learning vendors. And so, ultimately, if I start asking too many questions, they're not going to make money. And then I'm going to be out the door because I'm going to be asking too many questions. Yeah. So I think the really good thing about working for Thrive now is that we're working with L&D teams who really want to make a difference for their whole organization in a variety of different ways. It's not just like, oh, here's a piece of content that's going to solve the solution. It's thinking about that much bigger picture. And that is where it's much easier to have those conversations and be part of conversations where people are willing to do that as well. And I remember, I won't name which company it was that I was working for when this happened, but I was having a conversation with one of the sales team, and this client had 50 grand to spend on this contract with the company. And they said, this is what we want to do. These are kind of the things that we think we need. And we worked with them to figure out, what it was. And it came to about, I think we would have costed it about 25 grand. So I took it back to the salesperson and said, this is what I think they need. This is the cost of it. And he said, well, where's the other 30 grand? What we're going to spend the other 30 grand on? And I said, well, they don't need anything else. And he's like, yeah, but they've got a 50 grand budget. We need to spend it. And that is the moment I realized I was leaving that organization. But that is like, it's just so unethical to me that you would be doing that to a company when they think they're trusting you with that much money to do what's right for them. But actually the motivation behind it is, we just want to use your budget. And it wouldn't have necessarily been the right thing for them at the time. So that's a gripe.
It's an interesting one. And I think I see it, when I was working for the innovation company and helping business redesign new business models, and even in people experience, right? Employee experience, we get so caught up in this is working, we don't want to change and fix something, which, or be iterative and think, like, if you look at, say, if you look at most businesses, they have kind of three kind of offerings, right? You've got your core, your adjacent, and then you've got like this transformational. But most of the business stays in this core because it's a model what's working. It's the cash cow. It's the thing what brings the money in. So you've got these vendors, these providers who are like, no, we do e-learning because e-learning is bringing cash in. And because you get so caught looking down, sprinting, we never kind of look up and go, oh, actually, but what's the other business model? What come out of it? Going back to your point, right? Actually, there's a consultancy arm here. What could spin out the back of this, where we can start to go, actually, is this a real pain point our customers are feeling? And if it's not e-learning, what is it? And is there an opportunity there to spin up another kind of, service? I guess when I think about that part of you, and then I come back and I start thinking about, I think it was during COVID. I remember, so we're friends, obviously. We're friends on Insta and stuff. I remember seeing that there was a period of time where every time I went on LinkedIn, there was a nice little doodle, a little sketch, a drawing what you'd done. So it's interesting that you went into art college and you have clearly got an eye for good design. Like, I've seen some of the slides that you've done. I've watched you at talks and stuff like that. Your slides are always look amazing. I mean, you've got this artsy side of you, which is the sketches and the drawings. But but I've kind of stopped seeing them. Why?
I think I just haven't charged my Apple Pencil for a while. That's a cop-out answer. Yeah, it's a good question, to be fair. I think so. I actually started. As you say, I've always been arty. Like every school I've been to, like art was the thing that I did. I've always had an eye. My mum's an artist as well, so it's definitely where I get it from. My dad can't even draw a cat if you asked him. So it's definitely my mum's genes that I've inherited there. And so I love doing like the creative, like crafty side of stuff with my kids as well. Like that's something that I love doing. And so when the pandemic hit, I thought, I'm going to get into. So I was actually pregnant at the time, and then Mabel was born in July in 2020. So she's a pandemic baby. But during that period when I was on maternity leave and just before that as well, when the pandemic hit, I thought I'm just going to try and learn something new. So I bought an Apple Pencil, got Procreate on the iPad, and just thought I'm just going to see what happens. And I actually quite enjoyed it. So I thought, well, as many people did during the pandemic, I set up an Etsy shop and started selling stuff. Again, not really done anything like that before, just kind of took a chance and started creating a lot of cards actually, but also prints as well. And yeah, that just kind of took off. I actually sold quite a lot of cards. They were called, what were they called? Motivational magpies, they're little postcards with things on, but then other drawings as well. And then I guess as I got back into proper full-time work, I just didn't have the time with 2 kids and a full-time job, just didn't really have the time to do it as much. So yeah, I guess it's just kind of fizzled out. And I do it every now and then. I do pick it up, and sometimes Rory and Mabel use the iPad to draw on as well. But yeah, it's definitely taken a back seat to life. I think the thing is, I quickly realized that being on screen all day and on a computer all day, I then didn't want to pick up an iPad and start drawing. So I do often sketch with pens and pencils, but yeah, the digital side of stuff, which is, I think it's probably the stuff that I share because it's easier to edit. Like the stuff with my pen and pencils, probably just a bit shit.
I want to see him again. I used to enjoy him. So maybe this, I don't know if this came up actually when we very first met. Like, I think at the time you were thinking of bringing me in to do a talk or a workshop or something. And I think that's how I end up finding out about your sketch. I think you was talking about him at the time. I think, I can't remember, I can't picture it properly now, but I want to see him again. I used to be a keen drawer as a kid, and then I lost that skill. I didn't do it. And I remember I tried to pick it up a few years ago, and oh my God, it was shocking. But yeah, I want to see him again.
You do have to. You have to kind of you definitely have to practice. Like I've always had this thing, like, oh, I'll just be able to pick up a pen and pencil and be able to draw something in the way that I used to be able to. And it's definitely not that easy. And I can understand why my mum often gets frustrated with her paintings. I mean, she's an abstract artist anyway, but like she really struggles sometimes to bring her idea and her vision to life. And I can totally relate that you just have to kind of constantly practice on that. And I guess maybe that's why I don't practice enough. So whatever I'm doing, I'm just like, oh, I don't want to share that with anyone. It doesn't look good. But actually, yeah, maybe that's worth sharing because of that. I don't know.
I think it is. I think a lot of time when I'm working with, whether it be teams or companies or whatever, like I'm a big fan of sharing failure. And it's not a point of sharing failure to go, let's celebrate failure, because 100% we shouldn't be doing that. But we should be celebrating the learning what we got from that failure. And I think sometimes, again, I love your opinion on this, but like for me, I think there's something around, we have to show this perfect something on Instagram or this perfect something on socials or this whatever. And very rarely do we see the thing where we go, oh shit, I messed up there. Or actually, yeah, this eye on this fox is a little bit higher than what it needs to be. Like, and there's something around that whole learning and kind of sharing that failure. I would love to see more of just in general on social media. So yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah, I mean, social media has a lot to answer for in that regard. I think, like, from a keeping it real on a life perspective, I feel like that's what I'm doing at the moment with my training for the half marathon, where I'm sharing like my failures and my injuries, which I know you've seen, to kind of keep it real. So what I'm doing there is creating a log for myself of where I started and where I'm going to end up, hopefully crossing the finish line of a half marathon, fingers crossed, if my ankles and shins hold out. And that's kind of, I'm sharing it to remind myself of the times that it was really hard and the times that it's been really good as well. But I think, yeah, from that failure perspective, it's something we talk about a lot, but Thrive, but also outside of that in the women in community as well, like failing fast and learning faster. Just like is that saying that people use, and it's true. It's true to show that side of yourself is important, and it's I guess it's where you do your most learning, isn't it? Like everyone has to there is always failure in what you're doing, but it's then the progress after it that's important.
So what's made you do this half marathon? Like, what's been the thing where you've gone, I'm going to do it? Like, tell me about that.
Can you say that again? I think the connection just cut out. Sorry, Danny.
Yeah, sorry. So what's made you want to do this half marathon? Like, what's made you want to kind of do that in general?
I've got a story behind. Yeah, why? That's a good question. I don't know. You know what? Funnily enough, 10 years ago, I was training for the same half marathon. So it's Nottingham half marathon. It's the end of September, and I was training for it. And I was 10 years ago, I was a lot fitter than I am now. And I was training, and I went for a run one morning. I was staying at a friend's house, and I was like, right, I'm going to get up. I often run early in the morning anyway, but I got up early. But I'd forgotten my phone holder, so I couldn't take my phone with me. I was like, I'll be fine. I'm only going to run a couple of miles, and ran. And I always run with my phone, and this was a very unusual thing to do. But I went for a run. I didn't really know the area well because it's not somewhere that I would normally have run around. I was just happened to be staying at a friend's house, and I ended up in the middle of this woods, and then I rolled my ankle on a stone, and pretty convinced at the time I'd immediately broken it. It immediately bulged out. It was looking the wrong angle. It was horrible. But I was in the middle of the woods by myself at 6:30 in the morning, and I hadn't seen anyone else on my run. And I was like, fuck, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I've broken my ankle. I couldn't put any weight on it. But I was like, I can't just sit here and wait and hope that someone comes past, because it could literally be hours in the middle of a wood. So I just somehow, I guess the adrenaline kicked in, and somehow managed to like hop or hobble to the edge of the woods, which it probably wasn't that far in hindsight. And I had to flag down a car. And the first car, I was in a pretty dodgy area of Nottingham. The first car that drove past was a white Beamer with blacked out windows. And I was almost going to say, I'm just going to actually carry on driving. I don't want you to pick me up because it looked so dodgy. Yeah, I'd just rather hide in a bush, and yeah, someone will find me someday. And luckily, the guy that was driving it was a doctor, what are the chances? And he was like, yeah, that looks broken. I'll take you to the QM, to the hospital. And I was like, well, I don't want to go to hospital without my phone. So I was like, could you just drop me back off at my friend's house? And so I can get my phone and my purse, and like I can like actually have stuff with me to go to the hospital. And he was like, okay, it's around the corner. So he dropped me off. I woke my friend up. He was still asleep, and was like, you're going to have to drive me to the hospital because I think I've broken my ankle. It turns out it was a tiny hairline fracture, like really tiny hairline fracture. But that kind of knocked the half marathon on the head. And then it just kind of, that idea just kind of disappeared and never really thought about it again. And then, and you know what? I don't actually know what sparked it this year, but I just thought I'm going to do it. One of my friends asked me to do it with her last year. And every time I started training, I just started getting ill. It was probably training over winter, got quite a few colds, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And so I thought this year I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to start training. So I think I started training in about April. And it's been an up and down journey, realizing how old I am with all the injuries that I'm facing. But yeah, hopefully end of September, 10 years after I originally planned to do it, I'm going to cross the finish line. And also there's a lesson in that, is like never go running without your phone.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's there's something around that thing of an uncompleted goal, right? An uncompleted task. There's a law for it. I can't remember what it is, like a theory or whatever, but it's like you remember the things that are incompleted more than the things that are completed. But that whole scene, what you just said there, reminds me of something like what you'd see on like Crime Watch. Do you know what I mean? Going for a jog at 6:30 in the morning, they roll their ankle, they end up dead. It's like it's a whole scene thing.
It could have been a lot worse. Like that, if that car had been dodgy, like I don't know what I would have done. Like I was at that just point where I'm in so much pain. Young, like obviously young woman on the side of a road in distress. Like just don't know what could have happened. Like looking back now, I was extremely lucky that it was a nice. And to be honest, like the likelihood of it being someone dodgy would have been very. I guess it would have been unlikely. But yeah, it's a good story.
Nice. It kind of reminds me of like, yeah, sure, there's room in my boot here in the car. Feel free to jump on in and you'll never see anyone ever again. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to run away because I couldn't run. Yeah. So, I would have been fair game.
Wait and just see what happens next. Whole role play going on there. So I guess, okay, so you go from you running now and you're doing this kind of half marathon. And I guess the thing what I'm kind of thinking about is your whole kind of journey is you get into this space of selling cheese, into learning one way or another. Before that you went to be a hotel manager, and then like you've got all these other little tasks going on. And I guess what I've probably noticed over the last maybe year is obviously there's a running thing what you're doing now. There's a podcast what you're doing now as well. This Diary of a CLO. So I want to needle into a couple of them just to kind of see like what are these things, what are motivating you to do these things. Obviously, the running is more of like a personal, and then I guess the Diary of a CLO is personal and professional. So yeah, tell me about that. Like what's made you want to do the Diary of the CLO?
I think that, like you say, that's from a kind of a Thrive perspective as well. But I think that comes back to this idea of kind of positively challenging the industry to put kind of voices out there that, yes, are kind of well known in L&D, but then bringing people from outside the space into the conversation with, I guess, a lot of similar themes. I think it's normally around kind of leadership, people management, emotional management, mental health, human connection, building relationships, that sort of stuff. That those kind of themes kind of interlink in a lot of the conversations we're having. But I think there's been a lot of people releasing podcasts recently, and it was something that we'd kind of dabbled with, I think, in the past at Thrive, but not really had someone to kind of fully commit to it and to kind of be that voice for the podcast. So it seemed quite a natural thing for me to take on and to do. And I think that idea of, being able to have conversations with people and lead a conversation in a certain way and get certain stuff out of people when you're chatting to them is it is a skill, and it's been, I guess, one that I didn't necessarily know that I had in that capacity either, but it's been something I've been much more consciously aware of since doing Diary of a CLO. But it's allowed us to have kind of conversations with people that we maybe wouldn't have necessarily been having conversations with previously. So people have started they reach out to me quite a lot on LinkedIn or via email, or to Thrive in general, or L&D teams that we work with will start talking about how people within their organizations have listened to certain episodes that we've published. So it's that kind of reach of ideas and challenge and concepts that are relevant to L&D more broadly that I think is important. And it's been really eye-opening from a personal perspective to be doing a podcast. It's not something I'd ever done before. I didn't know anything about like recording or editing or post-production or how, just connecting it to Spotify, like all those kind of things, like tracking the metrics of it, like all the stuff that like in and out. But it's just been, that's been I guess the biggest skill I've learned this year is the like podcasting side of stuff and everything that goes into it. So it was a bit of a, again, coming back to this idea of failing, it was just an idea we thought, well, let's just give it a go and see what happens. And it's really taken off. It wouldn't have been a huge deal, I don't think, if it hadn't worked out. We would have probably just done something else. But it just seems to be really hitting the nail on the head a lot of the time with the conversations that we're having and the content that we're producing. And it's the important thing for me is that it continues to spark conversation after people have listened to the episodes. And that's the thing, like that is the whole purpose of it, is to carry on conversations. So it's been really good. And it's definitely something that I'd continue wherever my career takes me. It's something that I think I'll still want to do. It's like having the time to do it as well. Like it's a huge part of my role. So I'm glad that I have the time within my position to be able to commit to it, because it's a big task. And I think that you don't necessarily see all the behind the scenes stuff that goes into creating and editing and post production, which again you'll well know.
Yeah, I was just for the listeners. Prior to this conversation, I've just been to the barbers. Helen was saying how cool my hair looks. Cheers, Helen. You didn't say that. I just made that up. But I was having a conversation with my barber, and he was asking me, "What are you doing today?" I was like, "Right, well, I've got to do 2 podcasts today. One with you, one with another guest." And he's like, "Oh, right, okay, cool." He's like, "How long does it take to do your podcast?" I was like, "Well, depends. Sometimes the podcast is 2 hours long. Sometimes it's 60 minutes. It really does vary." He's like, "Oh, that's not too bad." But I'm like, "Yeah, but on average, it takes about 4.5 hours to do one episode of a podcast if you're doing it all on your own." Like, if there's a lot of effort in it, there's a lot of effort. And like you say, it's the research of it. It's the editing, the connecting of Spotify and iTunes and all these other things. And then you've got the whole marketing arm behind it, what needs to happen. I guess there's 2 things probably what I've noticed in my whole thinking about podcasts is, one, I believe a good podcast interviewer is really good at sense making. So obviously, when I talk on LinkedIn and stuff, I talk about sense making, right? Audience listening, understanding a problem and getting really in. And I think if you're a really good podcast host and interviewer, you're really good at doing that audience sense making, and that actually what is it they say they want versus what they actually really need and stuff like that. And I think that's probably, I agree. I think that's one of the skills what's sharpened for me is that. But you've had some pretty cool guests on your show. You've had kind of Sally Gunnell. In fact, let's talk about Sally Gunnell first. Like, what's your experience of interviewing Sally?
So I mean, I tell everyone this story when I speak to them, but I absolutely fangirled over Sally when I started recording the episode. I was just spent 5 minutes gushing at her, basically. I had to edit loads of it out, and there's still quite a lot of it in there, but Sally was a bit of a hero of mine when I was younger. I was, very sporty and did athletics a lot and cross country, and the tail end of her career was just about when I was old enough to just start being interested in athletics and sport more broadly. So I'd kind of, and my mum was a massive fan. Well, both my parents were a massive fan of both PE teachers, both massive fans of hers as well. So she was a bit of a household name for me when I was growing up. And so I just happened to notice on LinkedIn that she was running her own health and wellbeing business, and ended up connecting with her. And I sent her a message and was just like, I love you. Come on my podcast. Like, I'd love to talk to you. And luckily she didn't block me. She replied and was like, this sounds really cool. I'm happy to have a conversation, and came on the podcast. And it was just a really interesting conversation around kind of how her mental health had affected her performance when she was, again, coming towards winning gold medals or the end of her career, and how she pulled in a team of people around her to help and support her at a time when it was really difficult to admit that you were struggling mentally. And that's still, I guess, that's still something that sports people struggle with now. It's a lot easier for people to bring in sports psychologists or other kind of people to assist them in maintaining high performance, but it is still something I think that is spoken about with a bit of trepidation. So it was a really nice conversation, and she shared a lot about her experiences of being a high performing athlete and winning gold medals, and it was just really insightful and like such a great opportunity for me to chat to her. I was really grateful that she gave it a go.
Nice. And you've had a couple of other well-known guests, right? Who else have you had on there?
Yeah, so I had, I guess the most famous person I've had is Stuart Broad, obviously England cricketer. We recorded that episode live at one of our Thrive client events. And that was the first time I'd ever recorded anything live, like a podcast, I guess, or a Q&A kind of interview, as that was nerve-wracking. But then to do it with Stuart Broad, again, very famous sports person. I'm not a huge cricket fan either, so that really kind of pushed me out my comfort zone, because I didn't really know, like, I know the kind of some of the like lingo, but really couldn't tell you like who's who, or like what does a good score look like, or like what Knight's batsman, I can't even say it, means. Like I didn't really like, I felt really out of my comfort zone, because I thought, like, what happens if he starts talking about like these things that he expects me to know? So I'd done quite a lot of research beforehand, and like you say, like the research takes a lot of time. But fortunately, like, he is so, I mean, he's just retired, and he's now got a contract with Sky Sports commentating on the cricket. And it's not surprising, because the way that he articulates himself and the way that he comes across is so professional, but eloquent, and he just tells a really good story, and he's just so down to earth. So he made my job really easy, thankfully, at during that interview. And he shared more than I expected him to as well, which was really nice. Because I guess the worry when you're interviewing someone is that they don't go that kind of step further, and they just answer the question that you ask them and then don't expand on it. And that I was a bit worried about whether it would feel a little bit static when I was talking to him, but it was the opposite of that. And he engaged the audience and just spoke so well, and he spoke a lot about sports psychology and how he'd like not really given at the time, and then how that changed his career path. And he actually spoke about what retirement would ideally look like for him, like retiring on his own terms at his own time. And then a few months later, he retired. So it was great content for us, releasing clips of him talking about what retirement would look like. Very convenient. But it was such a great opportunity. And that was a great experience. But then we've also spoken to Alex Hales as well, also a cricketer. But his kind of career was a bit shrouded in controversy, because he failed a couple of drugs tests, and he was dropped from the England team. And we were talking much like about how he has fought his way back, and how he's doing so well at what he does now. And that's the first time he'd ever done a podcast for anyone. So it's a bit nerve-wracking for him to do that. And nice to be to have that opportunity to, I guess, give him the space to talk. And then we also had Dan Murray Serta, who's a podcast host, Secret Leaders podcast, which is, I guess, one of the top performing podcasts in the UK. And he is also the founder of Heights as well. So yeah, there's been lots of episodes, but like every people often ask me, what's your favorite episode? And I honestly can't answer, because I've got something different out of all of them. And Stuart Broad would be an easy one to say because of the whole experience. But then I've had conversations with like Alex Bailey from a consultancy firm called Bailey and French. She kind of opened my eyes to thinking about the way that you think about your team and how people kind of pick up for other people within a whole team, instead of thinking about an individual as a high performer. It's how do they function within a team. And when I say it kind of out loud, it might not make much sense without the additional context of what we were talking about. But when I say it out loud now, I'm like, why have I never really thought about that before? And it was a bit of a kind of mic drop moment for me in that conversation. That really stands out. And then I recently spoke to a founder of a diverse tech recruitment company who hire specifically from the Middle East and Palestine, and that they talk a lot about the talent that is in that region that don't have access to jobs, and how they help really large companies like Google and Meta and Amazon to hire diversity into their organizations, not just women but men as well, and that conversation was just really insightful. I guess something that I would not necessarily have been exposed to or had experience of, but because of the podcast, managed to. Well, in fact, I think it was someone who used to work for How Now, who's obviously one of Thrive's competitors, put me in touch with Ileana, who's the co-founder, and said this, like, Ileana would be great for your podcast, so maybe you should think about getting her on. So again, going back to like building relationships with other vendors in the industry or other people in the industry, like you just don't know like what opportunities are out there, and that's why building connections is so important.
It's fascinating. I think, we make the assumption that, competitors is bad because they take up our market. The reality is the pie doesn't get smaller, the pie gets bigger. Like the more you share and the more you build these relationships, the pie actually gets bigger, it doesn't get smaller. I think I was just listening to and like talking about the guests and whether they go that extra step. And, I think when people get me to do this whole kind of, hey, help us become better at sense making, audience listening, a lot of the time is exactly what you do on podcasts. And you'll notice, right? Like the what, when, why, who, how, where, Tom explain to me, demonstrate, like the real basic fundamentals, which we've overlooked in conversations now, because I think we have a conversation to speak, not to actually listen. And I think there's something around you have a conversation and it's a case of you're waiting for you to stop so you can say your bit, rather than that kind of pause and listen and really try and see what's not being said as much as what is being said. And I think, it is a challenge. It is a challenge when sometimes your guest is on the cusp of making that leap into a bit more depth and a bit more richer insights. And it's always a challenge. It is definitely always a challenge. But like you say, it's a good challenge because you get sharper at asking better questions, and actually you get sharper at listening, I think, more than anything, for sure. So you've got your podcast.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation with someone who came on my podcast about after we'd finished recording. He was talking about how good I was at listening to what he was saying and responding, instead of kind of leading with an agenda and saying like, we need to cover X, Y, Z. And we were talking, so then we got talking about active listening and how important it is when you're, in any conversation, not just a podcast, but actually paying attention to what's being said. But then thinking, I guess, also in the back of your mind about pulling out those ideas and the direction that you want, that is going to be useful for your audience too. And I think there's been times where someone's saying something to me that I'm thinking, actually, like the audience needs some additional context there. They're not going to fully understand, what you're talking about, or you've not really said it in exactly the way that they think they're saying it. So how do you then like kind of dig into it more without being like, what are you talking about? Kind of expand on this. So there's like, I guess is a bit tactical in that sense as well. But yeah, active listening is something that I guess everyone could just, in general, just needs to be better at or conscious of, because there's so much like, what's in this for me? What do I need to get out of this? Instead of thinking about what you're actually saying and what is definitely being said, rather than only thinking about your own agenda in a situation as well.
100%. I mean, just look at every single team meeting you go to. Every single team meeting, there's 95% of people are not actively listening on that meeting.
I think my connection might have gone, Danny.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Team meetings, you hear that all the time. Like, everyone gets on a team meeting, and the reason why your team meeting expands usually is because there's no kind of rigor to what everyone's getting together for anyway. But it's because people aren't actually listening. They're waiting because they've got an opinion, and this opinion is something they've got to get across without actually going, my opinion has now changed, and actually I'm allowed to change my opinion. I don't need to say this thing. I don't need to say that thing. Honestly, 95% of piss poor meetings and just bad time drags is down to that difference between listening and active listening. But I want to take away from the podcast for a second, and I want to kind of get you into this whole space of, in fact, no, I was going to take you into the communities where you built. But before that, let's go back to that question, what I asked you right at the very start. So actually pick a number. I think you picked number 7. And the question was, what is the most difficult thing you've ever had to apologize for? Anything come to mind? You mentioned you might have a few, but yeah, what's a big one?
I'm sure if I had more time to think about this, the list would be enormous, which maybe tells you something about the way I think about myself, Danny. I think the thing that springs to mind is, as a parent, is, I guess, losing my temper a lot. Not a lot, don't do it a lot. But when I do lose my temper and have to then apologize for doing that, I think that there's a kind of a guilt in, why did you get to the point where you reacted in the way that you did, and I guess shouted or got angry, and then having to say, I'm sorry, like, I shouldn't have done that, like, I just lost my temper, it's been a long day, or whatever that looks like. So I think it's difficult because obviously it's not a nice situation to be in anyway, but it's also something that you don't necessarily want to be. You want to be role modeling apologizing for things that you've done wrong, and I think that it's really interesting, the change that I see in, I think, Rory, not so much in Mabel, like because Rory's nearly 6, and Mabel's only 3, but the change that you see in him, he's obviously very upset when you're in that situation. If you've both got angry and you've both lost your temper, and then I apologize for saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have lost my temper, wasn't the right thing to do, blah, blah, blah. And the change that I see in him after I've done that, and to be like, oh, that's okay, like, I forgive you, or that's like, that's okay, I shouldn't have done what I did, or what. It's just very reflective and almost like a calming situation that occurs after saying sorry. So I think, losing my temper, it's not necessarily a specific thing, but just more broadly, and it's difficult to apologize. A difficult situation, probably maybe easier to apologize for than I give myself credit for.
Nice. And you mentioned there, like, sometimes it's been a long day or whatever it is, whatever them things have compounded down to. How do you switch off?
Yeah, I often don't. I don't think. I get running. I think is my reset. Like, I run, and that's where most of my ideas happen, is running. Just giving myself that kind of time to, I guess, not really think too much, but also be away from my desk. So either, I guess, running or walking. But that happens. I have to exercise at the beginning of the day, otherwise I just talk myself out of it. But I also love that, like, getting up, doing something, running, like, getting that kind of the endorphins going. But I do find it really difficult to kind of completely switch off, to, like, not check my email, or to not respond to people, or to not think, oh, I'm just going to read that article that I saw earlier, or, oh, that this, like, cool thing's just popped up on socials, I'm going to look into it now. And, like, I am very guilty of that, which isn't great and it's not ideal. But yeah, I think exercise is my safe space.
Nice. And just a quick note, do you let everybody know where you go running now? Just in case they can find you. Okay,
yeah,
so you
just
go
constantly trackable.
Yeah. Oh, here she is. Here she's just going over the hill. Okay, so I guess I want to get into kind of the community aspects around kind of what you do, and probably needle down a little bit more into kind of a learning development space. But before I get there, there's a couple of things which kind of come to mind for me. So you've talked about kind of, this leadership arm and this kind of, you speak to people and you learn stuff from people. I mean, you mentioned someone was talking about the team effectiveness and how well your team kind of look out for each other. And I guess, yeah, when you think about your career and take this however you want, whether it be voices in the industry, mentors, leaders, however way you want to take this. But I guess who's like the 3 or 4 people who stand out for you right now, whether it be leaders, voices, mentors, whatever. Who's like really stands out for you at the moment?
Yeah, I think one person I constantly reference at the moment is Lavinia Mehedintu, who is the founder of Offbeat. I don't know whether you've heard of them or her, but they collate a lot of resources effectively from across the L&D industry, and either provide kind of synopsis of it or access to them or information about them. But the other side of that is they've created a community around that as well, very much focused on coaching and mentoring and bringing people together across the globe, from an L&D perspective. And I think it's really refreshing to see that being done by a young female as well. So yeah, Lavinia Mehedintu is one person that I often reference, and I think Nelson Sivalingam as well, who is the CEO and co-founder of How Now, again, referenced and spoke about them earlier. But his book Learning at Speed is a really good read. So I'd recommend people kind of dig into that and have a read. But he's just also very good at articulating a lot of stuff that's going on across the industry. So that'd be good. And I'm gonna call you out, Danny, as well, as someone that I guess from more of a mentor perspective. I know that's definitely not what you wanted me to say, because I see you rolling your eyes at me. But I think having that kind of insight into how you can help organizations in multiple different ways is really useful for me to think about how L&D teams specifically are able to challenge what they're doing, but also communicate more effectively with other branches of their organization. So I think that's it. Was it 3 that you wanted?
Yeah, I'll take 3. Thank you for the name check as well. Okay though, so you've slipped me smoothly into my next question, which is L&D. Obviously previous recovering L&D person. I guess, Tammy, if I was to kind of put you in with, I don't know, let's put you in a lift with someone, or an elevator for the US listeners. And you're with a CEO or head of or whatever, and they say, okay, why does L&D need to exist in my company in this day and age? What would be your answer to that one?
Well, I think this is precisely the situation that a lot of teams that we work with or that I've worked with in the past face and aren't able to answer effectively. And that's because they don't have the data or the impact or the understanding of what they've actually done and the impact that it's had on. Oh, sorry, can you not hear me, Danny?
I can now. Go for it.
Okay. So yeah, I don't know whether you caught the beginning of what I was saying there, but I said it's precisely the situation that a lot of L&D teams that we work with, and then previously who I've worked with in the past, find themselves in that exact position, but are then unable to say what the impact or outcome of whatever it is they've been doing is from a data perspective and an impact measurement perspective, because they've not thought about how they can track that to start with. So I think if you're in that situation, you should already have been figuring out what it is that what the problems are that you're trying to solve, and how those problems align to those organizational objectives, and creating some what would be tangible measures of whatever the change is within your organization. So that's from an L&D perspective, working with cross-functionally across the organization. So I think the key thing there is L&D has been quite siloed in the past, not necessarily working as effectively as it could with the people who probably hold the data they need. So thinking, I guess, from the perspective of a lot of L&D teams feel like they're starting out from scratch with data, when actually there's a lot of information your organization already has that you can lean into. And so whatever it is that you're doing needs to be recognized as a real problem for the business or for teams or for departments or whoever it is that you like, however your organization is structured. And you need to be thinking about those the way that you're going to prove the impact. So if you're in that conversation, having a conversation with a CEO who's asking what the value of L&D is, I guess you're in trouble, because you should already be able to be coming and saying, we've done this and this is the outcome it's had on our organization. I've been a bit of a roundabout answer to your question there.
No, this is good. This is good, and I think you hit the nail on the head with one part of it as well, which was what you do for the business. I think, from my point of view, I think L&D, what is, when I was in it, you can get rid of it tomorrow. I think the future of L&D is quite exciting, and I think the future of L&D has to move from L&D to just being this kind of this problem solving team. But the problem is to make that leap is really hard, right? Like, a lot of the time, working with other clients, working with past clients in the past, it's like, right, it's giving people the skills and the culture hacks and the capabilities to do that. So whether it be design thinking, system thinking, service design, experience design, it's about this whole team accounting what needs to happen first and foremost, going back to your point earlier, which is actually how teams work effectively, and the ways of working needs to change. But there's a whole capability and skill piece what needs to go behind it. And it's interesting to go, okay, well, I'll just go and see someone who does service design. Well, actually, service design and looking at it from a culture point of view is very different, because you need to have an experience and depth in that area first and foremost. But I think you're exactly right. It is that business thing first and foremost. It's that thing of, actually, forget about learning, take that out. What problems have you fixed for the business is the bigger question, for sure. And I love that bit at the end, which is like, look, if they're asking you what do you do, you're already a bit up shit's creek, is it? I think that's the saying, because they should already know that, right? But there's something about sharing it as well. Like, do you think L&D share enough the stuff what we do, or do you think they're kind of just like British and like we don't shout about how good we are? I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I think my feeling is probably they're not they wouldn't be shouting about their success. Yeah, that's a tricky one, because I think that L&D have the organizations that we work with, the L&D teams have a hard time obviously talking, like promoting what they're doing and saying, we need to do this, or this is the challenge we're trying to solve, and this is what we need to roll out, and kind of, I guess, marketing what they're delivering to people. So I guess adding the extra noise in of, look, here's what we've done is sometimes a bit of a tricky place to be in. But I think we're definitely seeing customers, like Ann Summers, for example, do it really well, where they do kind of a recap of what they've done, what they've achieved, what the impact's been, and really think about it from a kind of that kind of metric and data perspective. So yeah, I think it's always a challenge. And I think actually from a remote or hybrid perspective, shouting about stuff needs to happen more regularly, because if you're not together often and you're not overhearing things or just having a casual conversation with someone, you need to go that kind of extra step further and really say, like, this is what we've done, this is what we've achieved, and bringing the right people into that conversation as well. I mean, ideally, in my mind, an L&D team should be having regular conversations and regular touch points with areas across a business, and so people, and that's kind of like building advocacy and building those champions, and then it's something that continues continuously, and that is an ideal, and I know that does happen in a lot of organizations, but where that's not happening and where they're kind of maybe just only starting out on that journey, I think it's even more important for them to then say, actually, this is where we started, this is where we are now, this is where we're moving the needle. But then the other side of that, like, this is where it's maybe not gone the way we expected, and this is what we're going to do about it, and this is why we can still have that opportunity is why we still need the opportunity to try or do something differently. Because I think that's another thing that L&D are quite guilty of, is not necessarily thinking about failure and experimentation in the way that is, or at all, really, not in a way, but they're not thinking about that really, and thinking actually like we're gonna do this as, yes, ideally, like that what we're releasing and what we're creating is going to have the impact that we want, but if it doesn't, does that matter? Like, can we just pivot and do something differently? And what are we going to learn from that? And how are we going to kind of move forward? And I think that kind of like experimental mindset is really important to L&D teams. That is, again, probably comes back to your point about upskilling. And that's something that we need to be doing more as L&D professionals, is getting comfortable with those kind of that kind of experimentation mindset, and also that kind of growth mindset, I guess, alongside that.
I think you're right. It's, when I look at people who have worked in the past, whether it be people experience teams, L&D teams, whatever else, all these different teams, like the one thing it always comes down to is actually how do they work? How's their way of working? Experiments beat pilots every day, hands down. We beat them in many ways. And but yeah, I'm yet to see someone who goes, right, a lot of the time I'm going, we're not going to do this 12-month leadership program. We're going to do it in sprints. Sprint 1, sense making. Let's understand what the problem is, blah, blah, blah. Let's have a look at service. Sprint 2, incubation. This is where we're going to come up with something. And it's this really quick, sprinty approach. Learning, experimenting, rapid learning as fast as possible. But yeah, I don't see many L&D teams doing that. And the one thing we see is L&D teams, on LinkedIn, there's always, we have similar networks, right? Like we've got L&D people in there. And I see it time and time again. Someone's just open to work. And it feels like at the moment, it's like cutting down L&D teams. And I get why from a business, but I'm also like, if you could experiment new ways of working and proving value as fast as possible, and whether that be creating measurement engines or newsrooms or whatever you want to call them, but there's something around that. L&D have to change the way in which they work and move at pace to go from 0 to new leadership, or 0 to X or to Y. And I think the appetite's there, right? Like I don't think L&D's full of like dinosaurs or anything like that. Like there's some real smart people. But I do sometimes wonder if L&D gets in its own way, or it's a system in which they operate in, what stops them from being what they want to be. I don't know the answer. It's unique.
Yeah, I don't know the answer either. I think it's an interesting challenge, because I think, like, you're right. There's so many knowledgeable and passionate people that are doing good things for their organizations. I mean, almost every customer we work with has someone who is just so passionate about what they do and how they do it. But it's that, are they caught in a system where there's still that kind of idea of what L&D is for an organization that just isn't modern anymore. And so it's kind of like, how does L&D actually market itself to the wider business and the wider organization? And I honestly think that will become easier as new generations come into the workforce, and ways of thinking change, and ways of being and doing shift as well, which is a whole other topic for another day, Danny.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, I guess 2 big questions for me now. But the first one is more thinking around Brené Brown. You've got a big love for Brené Brown, so I've got a question around Brené Brown and a question around women in learning. I'll let you decide which one you want to take. You can only pick one. So do you want to go Brené Brown
that's
or
not
women
fair.
in? Yeah, women in.
Is there some way that you can morph the two together?
Okay. What in Brené Brown made you want to go the whole women in approach?
Okay,
Real time.
interesting. Yeah, on the fly. Nice work.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I guess that stems from the reason that I founded Women in the first place was because I was actually having a lot of conversations. So, like, just for added context, the whole, like, Brené Brown is well known for her work on vulnerability and how you can, I guess, show up, in your relationships at work, but both outside work and inside work, in a way that is vulnerable, but also I suppose protects yourself at the same time, and that requires an element of bravery in how you respond to situations and show up within situations as well. And I'd noticed I was having quite a lot of conversations with people from across the L&D industry, and a lot of the time with women, but not always with women, about how they felt insecure in the networks that they were part of, or they didn't have access to the right mentors, or they didn't have access to the right knowledge and didn't really know what best practice looked like. And there was this element of opening up in those situations about those people being quite vulnerable to say, like, I don't really know whether what I'm doing is correct or not. And they were just one-to-one conversations that I was having, but I started to notice a pattern that was being repeated in a lot of these conversations. And I thought there's actually an opportunity here to actually bring these people together into a space that allows them to be that vulnerable with each other, saying, I actually don't know the answers. I don't know. I feel like I'm supposed to know the answers, but actually I don't. And can you offer me some guidance? Can I connect with you to do that? And so I created Women In, it's coming up to, well, it's about 9 months ago now. And constantly the level of feedback we get from the community is about how amazing that space is, that people they just come in and the conversation just starts flowing. And I don't know what magic it is that I've managed to create, but it is like a form of magic that people are able to come together, ask questions, and then get really honest response, help, advice, feedback, whatever it is people are looking for. They often find it within the group. And I think it's because of that it started off from that place of people feeling quite vulnerable, and there were a lot of people actually who were returning to work after periods of time out, that didn't really, they felt like their finger was off the pulse and they needed that connection. And I think if I hadn't started from that point of that very kind of human need for that connection, that knowledge, that advice, that kind of magic that we're seeing in the group now probably wouldn't be the same as it is, because I've heard similar groups, or been part of similar groups, where the conversation just doesn't really free flow, or people just don't respond to your questions. But if you've got something to ask in the group, someone will always be there with an answer, and various different people, not the same people all the time. So yeah, I maybe that ticks both of those questions off in one. But that Brené Brown's work is something that I always look to and always have in the back of my mind. But it definitely kind of feeds into the way we build connection in Women In as well.
Nice. And I'll put in the show notes where people can connect, join that community, and also where people can listen to Diary of a CLO. Okay, so you've gone from kind of wanting to be a hotel manager, to working in a cheese place, to being head of learning, chief learning officer, podcast legend, community legend. But if I was to ask you the question now, Helen, what do you want to be when you grow up? What would be the question? What would be the answer you'd say to that question?
I think I want to be a farmer.
Okay.
Just to throw another curveball in there, but I just got this idea of owning a small hold in the countryside, not being bothered by anything, in the middle of nowhere, having some chickens and some eggs, and I don't know, living off the land. I am not green fingered in the slightest either, so it's definitely a pipe dream. So maybe just living in a house in the middle of nowhere is where I'll end up, writing books or drawing, posting on Instagram.
Nice. Helen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Danny. It's been great.
Cool. All right. You have a great day, Helen, and I will speak to you soon.